Well, good afternoon and happy new year, y'all. Thanks for joining us for Ranching 101. We're excited today to be joined by a Texas A&M beef extension specialist to talk about so you want to be a rancher and the basics of cattle production. But before we get started, a few announcements. February 21st, we'll have Ranching 101 again. It'll be cold weather nutrition, so we'll be talking feeding and supplementing through the winter months. If you have not yet registered, convention registration is open, and we hope you'll join us March 24th through the 26th in Fort Worth. We're going to offer, like Ranching 101, 30 plus hours of educational content with some of the best speakers in our industry. And then we would like to thank our sponsors, Lone Star Ag Credit. They're huge supporters in this program. And so I'm going to play a brief video from them for y'all.
My name's Tony Ballinger, and me and my family own and operate Crossbeat Cattle Company. We'd be considered a first-generation ranching operation. You know, we kind of started from scratch and kind of built up over the years. Just me and my son, Carson. You know, the guys there at Lone Star, they do a good job of building a good relationship. It's more like dealing with a partner than it is a bank. And I think that's really important in the ag business. My name's Tony Ballinger.
Once again, just would like to thank them for their continued support of our education efforts. And as a reminder, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you're welcome to send them in the Q&A box or the chat box. And we're going to work to answer them as we go and maybe save a little time towards the end to answer any remaining. But with that, Dr. Clear, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Let me find it. All right. Well, good afternoon, and Tyler and TSCRA. I appreciate the opportunity to get to visit with the group this afternoon. Just a little plug for the TSCRA. They're a great organization that I'm a member of and have been for a while. And again, they just offer so many different opportunities for ranchers. There's a lot of perks and benefits. Tyler and I were just talking about the Fort Worth Stock Show, and you know, one of the benefits of that is I order my 2 tickets every year, general admission grounds passes. But there's so many other opportunities as well, and in addition to just that they are the voice, one of the voices of the ranchers, and it's become so important for ranchers to be involved in organizations like this. That way, we can collectively have a voice. Because Texas is changing, as you well know, and you know, we need to have that voice in Austin as well as Washington too. So it's a pleasure to be here, Tyler, and good to visit with the group. Again, if you have some questions, just send them in to Tyler, and we'll stop periodically with that. So I put together, Tyler just wanted me just kind of some basic high points. So you're in the cattle business. Let's just kind of think about some big picture thinking. I know you're going to talk about winter nutrition, and y'all talked a lot about specific topics already since this has started, but wanted to just go into just some basic things when we're talking about the ranching side. The one thing that is always important for me when I'm visiting with ranchers, whether it's new or those that have been in it for generations, we often think of ourselves as cattle producers. And we do. Our number one goal is to produce cattle, and especially if you're at the cow-calf level, you're interested in the reproduction side and producing those calves that you see right there. But in reality, we're in the food business, and we've got to think about producing beef for the consumers. And in order to be able to have demand for our product, we've got to make sure we've got a safe and wholesome product. And so we have to think about from the pasture to the plate, and think about all of those things from conception to whenever that product is marketed to the consumer. What are the factors that can affect it? So there are things that we do on the ranch, and I think you've probably had some speakers during the 101 sessions that talk about beef quality assurance, and that's our voluntary program within the United States and Texas to make sure that we are doing the right things to produce a quality product, but also a safe and wholesome product, and to do it in a manner that it protects our environment and make sure that we've got that product for future generations. So keep that in the back of your mind as you embark in the beef production system, is that we're in the business of producing a food product. And the way we do that is take that creature there, that calf, utilizing the forage resources, utilizing the land resources to produce that food product for us. The beef industry really is a forage-based industry. And a lot of times from the outside looking in, we hear a lot of folks talking about grain-finished beef, and that all beef today is produced from feedlots. And that is true, that we finish out the vast majority of our beef in feedlots or in a grain-based system. The reason we do that is because of the consistency of the product, but also the consistency of the supply that we can move through the system for our consumers. And also, the reality is there's periods of times when it doesn't rain, there's no grass, and so then we have to go into the grain-based system. But again, a good portion of our cattle are finished out there, but I would say about anywhere from 65 to 75% of a calf's life is spent on grass, from the day it's born all the way till it's weaned, till it goes into a grazing, and then finally wraps up the grazing and enters the feed yard. So a good portion of its life's on grass. And then, of course, all of our cattle, our cows, the reproductive unit, they spend the vast majority of their life grazing and harvesting forages on their own. And so, again, we are a forage-based industry, and that'll be the first thing that we talk about today, is the importance of forages. And if there's any naysayers that say, well, no, it's, the beef industry today is primarily grain, feed yards. Well, if that's the case, we wouldn't have lost a good chunk of our cattle population over the last year to 2 years because of droughts here in Texas and then through this region as well with that. So we are a forage dependent type system, and preferably we let the cows harvest the forage versus we harvest and feed it back to them. Now, again, I love this little cartoon here I picked up years ago. And that's not the way we do it, but that is in reference to really and truly stored forages and hay. There are periods of time where we have to mechanically harvest hay and then feed it back to the cattle. But if you've been in the business at any point in time here recently, you'll understand that the cost of harvesting, storing, and then refeeding our feed supplies has gotten really, really expensive. So we continue to focus on a lot of the things that we do and work with producers, is focusing on that grazing and trying to get as much of that nutrition for that cow out of the forage that they harvest themselves. Again, we understand that there are times where we do have to feed some stored forages. So we're going to talk a little bit about some forage systems today and kind of that ground up with that. The U.S. beef industry, just wanted to break it out for you just a little bit. So we're going to spend our time today talking about the cow-calf segment and getting into the cow-calf business. And the cow-calf business is the foundation of the beef industry, and it's where we're producing our calves that move on to be turned into beef. And our cow-calf side is divided into two different segments. One, the commercial, and with the commercial operation, that's about 95% of our cow-calf producers. And those are typically involved with producing calves. So producing calves that end up moving on to be weaned off the cow, turned out on grass, and eventually in the feed yard and turned into beef. Now, the other portion of the cow-calf that some of you may be involved in, which only about 5% of our ranchers would fall into the seed stock or purebred category. And these are typically referred to as our genetic suppliers. So the purebred or seed stock operators, they're providing predominantly bulls back to the commercial operator. And hopefully they're improving the genetics year after year to continually improve the production at the commercial producer. But they're also maybe marketing to them replacement females as well. So that seed stock producer, again, is the genetic supplier. And we'll talk a little bit about that because it is a viable option for some folks. The next segment, when they off the cow, and I'll show you some basic parameters of weaning weights and so on here in just a moment. But after about, on average, about 7 months after birth, that calf is weaned from the cow, and a couple of options occur then. So with that weaned calf, we can retain it on the ranch. We can take it past the weaning period, precondition it, or get it ready for the next stage of the life, and then market it. We could market it straight off the cow. But that calf is going to go to two different options. It's either going to go out on grass, which is our stocker phase. So some of you may have heard the term stocker cattle. And all stocker cattle is just weaned calves that we turn out on grass, and it could be native, improved. You see right now, if you drive up and down the road in central Texas and the rolling plains, a lot of winter pasture, wheat, oats, ryegrass that those cattle can be grazing and growing. And then from that point, they can go into the feed yard. And then the feed yard is the finishing period. Sometimes, depending on cost of gain, the cost of grain, availability of forages, we will send them also directly at weaning straight into the feed yard as well. From the feed yard, they're harvested at the packer, and then we're spread them out to the retailer and food service, and then finally to the consumer with that. Some of you, I know we're talking predominantly on the cow-calf side, but a stocker option could be an option for you guys as well, if you don't want to be tied down to a cow-calf operation. The stocker operations give you a little more flexibility in buying and selling cattle, but they also can give you some flexibility whenever we get into abnormally dry conditions. It's easy to move those cattle. So that is an option for some producers, is to avoid the cow-calf and move into the stocker level with that. So let's get to the cow-calf side. I wanted just to hit on the seed stock operation and what it is. And again, the purebred or the seed stock operator is they're charged with providing the next generation of genetics for the commercial operators. They're typically the more higher profile segment of the beef industry, because again, they're doing a lot of marketing to market their superior genetics. But again, they're mainly producing bulls to go into the commercial operation, but maybe also replacement females as well. They're utilizing a lot of data, collecting a lot of data in order to improve their cattle, to make them better for the commercial operator. And they're utilizing a lot of technology, whether it be conventional embryo transfer. This was a calf, some genetics that were donated by the R.E. Brown Ranch to the Texas A&M Beef Center. This calf was produced using in vitro fertilization, and the embryo was placed into this surrogate cow. This is a clone, one very advanced genetics. So this was a clone of a high value cow for a producer. Cloning is not utilized very much in the seed stock operation because of the extreme cost, as well as it takes a long time. So in this case, it took 4 years from the date that the tissue sample was taken until this particular female was able to produce genetics that could be marketed. And so that's a long period of time with that. So seed stock operations are a very specialized unit of the cow-calf operation with it. Typically, there is more, you can produce animals with a higher value and it takes less animals, but it's also very labor intensive and very high capital intensive, input intensive as well with that. So could be an option for some of you guys. So cow-calf operations. So let's just look at just some beef cattle averages. Gestations, roughly 283 days. So roughly 9 months. So 283 day gestation. Birth weight is 80 pounds. We typically wean the calf at approximately 7 months of age, and we'll talk a little bit about weaning and when to wean here in just a minute. And good average kind of weaning weight nationally would be 500 pounds, but that can range from 300 to 900 to 1,000 pounds, depending on the system. Weaning age, again, it can fluctuate as well from anywhere from 3 months all the way to 10 months of age. Age at first calving, we typically want our replacement females to calve by 2 years of age. But that could change a little bit depending on the system. For them to calve at 2 years of age, you're going to be breeding them when they're roughly 15 months of age, if you're factoring in a 280-day breeding season. Mature cow weight, kind of an average of 1,275 pounds. That's crept up over the years, depending on your location, where you're produced. So, for example, in Texas, if you're producing cattle and out west, you're probably going to be closer to that 1,000-pound range. If you're producing cattle in deep East Texas, you may be in that 1,300 to 1,400-pound range. And so, again, that's just depends on the production area that you're in, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Number of calves in the lifetime of a cow is roughly 8. And that's assuming that that cow will last about 10 years in the operation, be 10 years of age. Again, that varies a little bit on the production conditions. If you've got very extensive, a little tougher conditions, that 10-year mark may be closer to what you see. But if we've got good forage and also Brahman cross cattle, typically will last longer and be more productive. And so they may last into that 12 to 14 years of age. So they can be another 2 to 4 calves in their lifetime. Forage intake about 32 pounds, peak production of milk about 20 pounds per day. So 2.5 or so gallons. Pre-weaning calf gain about 1.75 pounds per day. So that is, once that calf is born, from the date of birth until you wean it, you typically will see about 1 3/4 pound per day gain out of that particular calf. So that gives you just some ideas, some averages for the beef cattle averages. Tyler, any questions out there yet?
Not yet.
Okay, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Okay, so before we go any further, we've talked about cow-calf, and we talked about the production. The thing that we're producing is calves that will ultimately be turned into meat, our product for our consumers. But I want you to keep this basic economic model in the back of your mind, because everything that we talk about, I always try to reference back to this. So in a cow-calf operation, we have our production inputs, so what it costs to produce our calf crop. And we've seen over the last couple of years that has been driven up dramatically through feed, fertilizer, and fuel costs, equipment costs, labor costs. All of those factors have gone up. And then we have our product. And so our product is our calf. And so that middle box on a cow-calf operation makes up for about 75 to 85% of the income from the cow-calf enterprise. The remaining percent comes from our cull cows or cull bulls. So whenever a cow is at the end of her reproductive life, or a bull is, we can market that animal and it will be turned into beef. And so we get a salvage value out of that animal. So that's, somewhere around roughly 15% of the income that we generate out of the cow-calf enterprise. So that middle box is a big portion of our income. And so we look at the three factors that influence the income of the cow-calf enterprise: wean calf crop. All right, so how many calves that we have to market, the pounds at weaning, so what is the weight of those calves that we're going to market, and then the price per pound. We multiply those three things together, and that gives us our income. Now, oftentimes in a real live audience, I'll ask, well, what is the most important of these three factors there? Is it wean calf crop? Is it pounds at weaning? Or is it price per pound? Oftentimes, the audience will scream out price per pound, or they'll scream out pounds at weaning. Usually the lowest answer is wean calf crop. But in reality, your wean calf crop is the most important of these three factors. Now, all three are important, but that wean calf crop is going to be the most important factor because it's going to really influence the income of the operation. And so getting getting cows bred, making sure that they hold that calf through gestation, making sure they have a live calf, and that calf survives until weaning or the period of time you market it is so important. And again, pounds at weaning are important, but price per pound are important. But if you have a big hiccup here in your reproduction, it will have the biggest impact on your income there. So again, these three are all important, but you have to think about reproduction. And a lot of the things that we talk about in managing cattle all goes back to reproduction. The discussion you'll have next week on winterizing the cow herd, they're going to talk to you of why it is so important to evaluate the nutrition of the cows and make sure that they're being taken care of, because reproduction is influenced by nutrition, and they'll probably show you some data on that. So these three are the most important, but we also have to keep in mind too that your production inputs are important, because you can produce the highest value animals as far as wean calf crop, pounds at weaning, and price per pound, but if your input costs override that, you're in a losing situation. The one key thing to remember, that every person that's on this webinar, their operation is going to be a little bit different. It doesn't matter if you're neighbors right across the fence from one another. Your box may be a little bit different, and that's certainly true as you move from region to region or across the United States. This is going to change considerably. If you're out in far west Texas, your box is going to be a little different because your production inputs are going to be lower. If you're up in the Midwest where they feed cattle a lot, they have more feed resources. They try to produce the most pounds and the highest price per pound. Their inputs are also going to be higher as well, but they're going to generate more revenue here. So keep this in the back of your mind as we have some discussions as you put your operation together. So when we think about ranch management, what's the first thing that should be considered with that? It's a pretty simple answer. Your production environment, where you're producing your cattle, because the reality is the poultry industry, the pork industry, they put their animals in houses, in climate controlled houses, where they pretty much regulate the environmental conditions. In the cattle business, we produce them out there in the environmental conditions. And those environmental conditions can range from Florida or just in Texas. Let's just talk about Texas. It could be Anahuac, Winnie area, which is down in the coast area where they've got swamps, snakes, gators, mosquitoes that are big enough to pack you away, hot, humid environments, all the way into the tip of the panhandle which will be environmental conditions that are more like the Midwest. And so those environmental conditions, you've got to figure out where you're producing your cattle with that. And so as you look at temperature ranges, average annual nighttime temperatures, and you can find this from a city to city and a county to county. As you can see, as we move from the south to the north, you would expect those average annual nighttime temperatures to change considerably. And that's the big difference between us in this southern region of the United States, and specifically those of you that are in that kind of College Station down to the south. If you'll notice that our average annual nighttime temperatures are 65 to 70 degrees. And that's really impactful during the summertime because there's not a lot of cooling of those animals in the summertime. So, we will see in this southern portion of the United States a lot of Bos indicus type cattle because those cattle just do better and they perform better and they can handle these temperature conditions. At the same time, you definitely wouldn't want to take some heavy Bos indicus or Brahman influenced cattle and try to raise them when you've got average annual nighttime temperatures that are really cold with that. So looking at your temperature range, rainfall is a big one as well. Knowing where you're going to be raising those cattle. And specifically in Texas, we always talk about that I-35 corridor. And if you'll notice, I-35 corridor there, typically east of I-35, it's a higher rainfall level than west of Interstate 35. And again, we're looking at average rainfall inches. So I'm sitting over here today in Brazos County, specifically College Station. I live and my ranch is in Madison County. But if you look at that rainfall there, we're somewhere in that about 40 inches of rain per year. If you get over here and you're out in West Texas in the San Angelo area, you may be looking at 22 to 26 inches of rain. And so that's going to really impact the type of cow that you're going to put there. And typically, as we move from the west, where we've got rainfall that is less predictable, forage conditions that become less predictable, we typically will utilize cows that are a lower mature cow weight and not as high milking and have an easier fleshing ability, so that those cows in dry and really good conditions where we have forage, they can put on more condition or fat and be more efficient whenever there is not optimal forage conditions. As we move over here to the east, we will typically see cows that are a little bit heavier mature cow weight. They milk a little bit better. And the reason is because if you look at our rainfall, it's typically on average going to be more predictable. And so we've got a more predictable forage resource with that. So again, that's just some basics there. And Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, if you're interested in genetics or the types of cows to put in, there's a number of Texas Adapted Genetic Strategies publications on our Texas A&M AgriLife Extension resource website that talks about this. And one of them is adapted genetics to environmental conditions. And it really gets into detail on types of cows and with respect to your production conditions in the state of Texas. And then again, there's your vegetational areas. And again, you could see as they change as you move from the western portion of the state to the eastern portion of the state as well. So knowing where you're producing cattle is extremely important from the standpoint of matching the cow to those environmental conditions. But that's also important of, what is my, forage going to be? As we get into the management side of what foragers are available, what are my grazing systems going to be? What is my breeding and calving season? Because I kind of want to match that to when I've got the best forage resources. Also, my herd health plan. That's going to have your environmental conditions will have an impact on that. One example is out far west. You're probably not, the odds are that you're not going to have to deal with internal parasites to the same level that we would see them all the way into the Gulf Coast area of the state of Texas. So your herd health plans are going to be different. And your marketing plan may change a little bit depending on your environmental conditions as well as what forages you have. So one thing that I think is important is soil types and grazable acres of your ranch. There is a tremendous resource that is available, the USDA NRCS. They have a lot of programs out there for landowners or ranchers, but one of the things that they have is the Web Soil Survey. And Tyler doesn't remember this, but when I was in college, we had to go to a library and for one of my classes and look at my soil survey map for my home ranch. And you could find those in the library or your NRCS office. And it was an actual book, Tyler, in an actual building, a library. All right. But Tyler, she's fresh out of school. She probably didn't have to do that. But now they have this pretty cool thing is that it's online now, the Web Soil Survey. And the Web Soil Survey is years and years ago, a long time ago, probably nearly 100 years ago, the USDA NRCS, they made a tremendous investment in mapping out the soils of the United States and looking at what types of soils and also how those soils will impact things like forage production, crop production, nutrient soil analysis, but also things like, well, how does that impact what you build on those too? And so they went in and they mapped these out, and it's amazing at the time. And you can, if you went back and looked at some of those old maps, it took a lot of man hours to do that. But now they've taken it a step further, and everything is online with that, and it's integrated with satellite imagery too. So if you'll go to, you can look up, just type in Web Soil Survey, and it will take you to the USDA NRCS Web Soil Survey site. And you'll click on this green button here. And when you do that, it pulls up a screen that looks similar to this screen. And so what I've done is I plugged in and I put my address in here. Over in Madisonville, Texas. So Madisonville, Texas is right off of Interstate 45, halfway between Dallas and Houston. So we're I'm on the western side of Interstate 45. And so my area is probably more Post Oak. When you get east of I-35, you've got a little more acid soils. Or east of I-45, you got a little more acid soils, and you'll see more pine trees in that area. But so you can see here, this is the map that you can see. So they've got GPS maps that are continuously updated. So kind of like Google Earth images, as you can see there. And this map is fairly updated. I'm not sure how often they update them. I think it's about every year when the satellites pass over. But I know it's fairly updated because I can look at and see my barn, a new barn, and some different things there with that. So as you can see, this green area, shaded area, early this morning, I went in and I mapped out my piece of property. Okay. And you can do that utilizing a number of different tools that are very easy to use on this particular website. But this is my property, and I did it pretty quickly. It says that it's about 63 acres. I was a little bit off on my property lines doing it. If I was a little bit more meticulous, I have been able to get it to where it's within an acre, because I've got roughly about 66, 67 acres on the home place here. But as you can see, the neat thing about this is that I can go in and look at areas. So this is a front pasture here. So I could go in and just highlight this front pasture, and it would give me an idea of how many grazable acres that I have up there. Or if I want to go in and kind of map out the areas that are not under trees, I could go in and just highlight those areas and see what my actual acreage is of those particular areas. So it has a pretty neat tool that you can go in and calculate how many grazable acres that you have. You can also work with the USDA NRCS, your local office, and they can help you map those out as well. So that's a resource that they do offer, but you can do it online pretty easy. But you can also go in there and click on another feature and look at your soil map and specifically what type of soils you have in your area, as well as vegetative production estimates and so on. And so my particular place back here, the front portion of the property, right in through here, it would be a kind of a loam, sandy loam type soil. But on the back side of the place, there's a big hill, and that hill is really a much sandier type soil back here. So it's tremendously different. And so that can be important just from the standpoint of looking at where those different soil types are to help you with soil sampling. Because if you were trying to figure out fertilizer requirements for this entire property, if you just went in and took samples here and here and here, that may not be a good representation of the property. You may be better suited to soil sample the areas where you've got similar type soils. So again, this map gives you an idea of what what kind of soils that you have. And there's a tremendous amount of other resources that are available with that. So again, that's a good starting point for you. And there's some valuable tools with that as well. Another cool feature too is you can go in and there's a ruler up here. And so this fence right here on my property line, we built it, my neighbor and I did. We contracted it out back 3 years ago. And I went in, I was just I could have went back and looked at my actual survey, but I was just playing with this tool, and I went in and I measured this, and it was very, very accurate. As far as how many feet I was going to have to pay somebody to build. So that's another good tool that you have, as well as some pretty good estimates of, fence line length and those types of things too. So
we've got a couple questions.
Yeah.
So the first one is, if it continues to be extremely dry, should a person start cutting back on stocking numbers sooner rather than later?
Very good question. So when we get into a drought situation, and we still are for a good portion of the state, as you get into central Texas, west of Interstate 35, it's pretty dry. And so the question was, when we get into this drought situation, is it better to make some decisions early on? And the easy answer is absolutely yes, because if you begin to make those decisions earlier, you will reduce your overall stocking rate, which will hopefully extend your forage resources longer, your grazing resources, before you have to bring in some kind of stored forages. And so we always tell folks that if it looks like we're in a drought situation and things are going to get tough, then start culling cows, cows that are open, cows that are aged, cows that maybe have one bad quarter in their udder, problem cows that are not going to be more productive for you. So make those easy culling decisions early. The other reason why it's better to begin to weed out some of those problem cows earlier rather than later into a drought, a prime example is my dad. I tried to get him back in the summer. So as we got into the 1st of June, I said, Dad, it's getting rough, and you're not going to have enough grass. I said, we need to really cull some cows. And he had a bunch of old cows. I said, it's time to do it right now. Well, he messed around. Finally, about 4 weeks later, he said, okay, you're right. We got a cull. And we did, but the market had took a dramatic drop. So again, the farther you get into a drought, the market's going to drop as well. So second question, Tyler.
Our next one is, how many acres are needed per calf or cow for feeding?
Good question. So that again comes down to rainfall area and where you're located. So if you're in far west Texas, you get over there close to the New Mexico border, you may take anywhere from 30 to 50 plus acres per cow calf pair to sustain them. Versus you get over into this part of the state where I am, in the eastern portion of the state, where we've got 40 to 46 inches of rainfall, and our stocking rate's probably somewhere in that 6 to 7 acres per cow of grazable land. Now that is grazable. If you just take your property, just like I showed you a picture of mine, and you say, okay, I've got 70 acres. Well, if you saw that property of mine, and there's barn, there's roads, there's house, there's trees. And so really on that section of land, I probably only have about 50 grazable acres there. Always remember, the more intensive that you stock, the more your supplemental feeding will be during the winter time. And also you have less time to respond to a drought situation with that. So, and the next question is, well, how do I know my stocking rate? Well, historically, if the landowner before you had this particular stocking rate and the forage conditions look good, that's probably a good starting point. So ask around, visit with your local county extension agent. Each county's got an extension agent there, and they can give you some estimates. Your USDA NRCS can help you out as well. I would always recommend probably stocking at about 75% of where you think it is, and then you can kind of adjust. But always remember to look at it kind of an average. If you stock at the stocking rate that you think is appropriate for this past year, you're going to be very understocked. If you stock at a rate where we're at a good rain year and we've got 60 inches of rain, on average, you'll probably be overstocked most of the time. So good question. Any others, Tyler?
One is, what is the best source for market price outlook for coming months? A crystal ball. So very good question there on what it looks like as far as the market outlook. So Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, we have some ag economics market analysts that look into the future of that. And so Extension has some resources. So if you'll go into Ag Eco, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, they'll have some market outlooks that they'll put up there. So that's a great resource. There's also some resources coming up at Cattle Raisers Convention. I'm assuming, Tyler, will there be somebody from CattleFax there? CattleFax is a private organization that collects data and does market predictions. They provide a subscription-based newsletter that will provide that, but they also do some things like that as far as a market outlook at TSCRA convention. And there's some other private entities out there as well. But, from a free perspective, well, you're paying tax dollars. The extension group in ag economics, they do some market outlooks. So good question. And hopefully the market looks strong coming into the next couple of years. If you look at all the market fundamentals, demand and cow numbers and everything else. So we'll see if it comes true. We have a couple more, but I'll let you keep going and we'll get to them. They're about forage. So you might answer them.
Perfect. Good deal. All right, so forage systems. So let's, big picture, the different types of forage systems. We've got warm season perennials, and a perennial is a forage that comes back every year for us. And the most common across a good portion of Texas is Bermuda grass, and that's an improved pasture variety. Bermuda grass can be planted utilizing seed, but a lot of our hybrid varieties of Bermuda grass, like Coastal or Tifton or Jigs, those have to be planted and are propagated through tops or sprigs. And so you've got to do soil preparation, and then you go in and you plant those tops or the sprigs. And then they will grow from that. And essentially, it's the same concept as if you cut your grass and you blow the Bermuda grass into the flower bed, those trimmings, if there's soil and moisture contact, they will sprout. And so it's the same concept with a top. So Bermuda grass takes some grazing management as well as fertilization, weed control. It's going to be a higher input type grass. Bahia grass is, sometimes people call it the poor man's grass, or the closest thing in the eastern portion of the state to a native low input grass. And so Bahia grass is one man's blessing and another person's curse. If you're trying to keep Bahia grass out, it is a curse, and there are herbicides to do it. Bahia grass, you will not have the tonnage that you produce close to Bermuda grass, but you can really use and abuse Bahia grass. It takes a lot of grazing pressure. You won't produce the tonnage. It will typically brown out faster than Bermuda grass when we get to dry conditions, but it will green up faster than Bermuda grass. There is a huge seed base, so if you get into a kill off like we saw in the drought, you will see it come back quickly. With a little bit of herbicide and a little bit of a fertilizer, you can grow that grass fairly well. And actually, with very little fertilizer, it still will give you some production there. Like I said, it's kind of a low input type grass that you either curse it if you don't want it, or if it's a blessing, but it can be a good forage quality. You've got your old world blue stems, as well as native range, short grass, a lot of different range pastures as we move west into the north as well. Those are some opportunities. The native range tall grass. Again, when you get into these range type conditions, they're lower input forages, but they take a lot of management. If you overgraze these range conditions, these native pastures, the first thing that's going to come in to plague you is going to be your mesquite and other brush. So the competitive species. So it takes a lot of management to do them, but they are very effective. And again, they're very low input type forages that under the right conditions, they work exceptionally well. Your annual forages, that is actually grazed out sorghum Sudan, or some of you may have heard hay grazer. So that's a sorghum variety that is bred to have more leaf versus a stem. When you're thinking of this particular forage, there's a lot of tonnage produced, but you also kind of have to be a farmer too, because you're going to have to go into soil preparation, fertilization. But again, you'll produce a lot of tonnage for grazing during the summertime, and you'll produce a lot of tonnage of hay as well. But it is very labor, high input, very intense production, almost farming. Here is something that's pretty common in the eastern portion of the state is ryegrass that's been overseeded. And you'll also see a lot of just regrowth ryegrass. So ryegrass is a big seed producer. And so once you plant it or even feed hay with it in it, it's going to spread in your operation. So it's a good forage. You'll see it coming up in the fall, but you really don't see a lot of growth until we get into mid-February, the 1st of March. This year, hopefully we'll have a warm winter, and we may see it a little bit faster with that. Other annuals that we have in the wintertime are oats, rye, as well as wheat. But those three varieties have to be either drilled in or they have to have some soil bed preparation to go along with it as well. What's the goal of a forage system? Try to maximize the days of grazing that you have, and reduce or eliminate supplementation needs. And when I mean supplementation, I'm not talking about cubes or a tub. I'm also talking about hay resources. And as we talked about before, with input costs, feed costs, hay costs, the way they are now, trying to extend that grazing season is very important. And so, grazing management is something we do. And so, what does a cow eat? Having that understanding, those cows that are grazing this early on, they're selective in what they eat. As the forage becomes shorter, then they have to go in and kind of graze it off. If you're in a range condition, this is still improved pastures here. If you're in a range condition, what those cows eat is going to look a lot different than what you see in this monocultural type production system. They're eating every plant that's out there. If we go back to some of our improved systems, they're going to be selective in some of those range conditions into the plants. So you may not be able to just graze it strictly off with that. So understanding what the cow eats, okay? So here's an example year on a forage system of a ranch in College Station, Texas, Bermuda grass, cow-calf operation. So what is your forage plan, okay? Does it entail what kind of forages? And so in this scenario, this ranch, as you can see, this is a Bahia grass as well as mixed with Bermuda grass. So how long is that Bahia grass or Bermuda grass grow? What is my grazing period of time on average? Again, you got to look at the average there with that. So if we look at warm season perennial grasses, we typically will start to see some growth in April. But when we get those nights that begin to warm as we get between April and May, that growth accelerates rapidly, okay? And it's typically bimodal. And with that, you'll notice that there's two peaks. We'll see the peak as we get into the spring and very early summer. In the eastern portion of the state, typically as we get into June and July and the 1st of August, we call it our summer brownout. There's two things that happen. One, it gets very hot and that grass slows a little bit. But then two, also, we typically will see a little bit drier conditions. We get into August in the eastern portion of the state where we are, and we will see some tropical moisture begin to move in. And with that tropical moisture coupled with some still fairly warm nights and warm growing conditions, we'll see that forage peak out around late September. Typically, once we get to the 1st of October, our nights begin to cool off. And so you can see we have a pretty long period of time when we can grow Bahia grass or Bermuda grass in this part of the state. So how do we fill the gaps in that system? How do we fill that period of time from really December to maybe the 1st of March into the 1st of April? We've got about 4 months period of time. Well, there's a number of options. Well, the easy option is hay, all right, stored forage, but that is very expensive. And we still have to use hay, and we still do. Another option is stockpiling forage. And so instead of taking that last cutting in the fall, we grow that forage up and we graze it for a period of time. It could be a combination of those three. Stockpile that forage so that I don't have to start feeding hay until maybe closer to the 1st of the year with that. That way now I only have January, February, maybe the 1st of or end of March. So 90 days rather than 150 to 180 days. So I can shave that off period of time. We can incorporate winter annuals into the system if we want with that, and that could be overseeding ryegrass, and there's advantages to that. If you get growth and if it rains, you can shorten your grazing season. I've seen ryegrass available for grazing mid-February in a warm winter. But typically it's when we get into mid-February, 1st of March with that. And so we have that ryegrass as an option, and we'll have grazing on it until we get into May with that. Now, the downside of the ryegrass is if you don't graze it off quick enough, it will hold back some of your warm season grasses. And regardless of how well you graze it, your warm season grasses in those ryegrass pastures may not come back as quickly as those that do not have ryegrass overseeded. But it's a great option. It's part of the system. Our ryegrasses, typically, again, we will see some grazing to where we can get on them as we get into late February. So we get into late February all the way to May is a good growing season with them. And it may be all three. When I was in Overton working there at the research center before I moved to campus, I was beef cattle specialist over there. We did a lot of research, Dr. Redmond and I, looking at all of these. And we work with producers over there and putting some of these trials in where we minimized hay feeding to 30 days. And there were a couple of years that there was no hay fed with that. Now you say, well, how do you guarantee that? Well, that's where it comes into if you've got a barn to store hay, that's a more ideal situation, just in case you need it with that. So putting it all together with that, as you can see here, this slide just talks about filling in the gaps. Here's our Bermuda grass growth during the warm season, maybe winter pasture during the skips, stockpiled forage. So putting that together with wherever you are in your particular system is important. As we begin to wrap up, a couple of things. I didn't make it through all my slides, Tyler. I apologize. When do you want your calves born? All right. That's always another question. When's the best time to calve? Well, there's several factors. A cow has her highest nutrient requirements 2 months post-calving. So when she's late gestation and lactating, that's when her nutritional requirements are highest. So you'd like to maybe target calving season when you've got the most resources available, and especially when you're breeding those cows back with that. So matching what your forage system is to what the cow needs, but also we do know that there's seasonal price variations too with that. We know that calves are highest in the spring, and they're typically lowest as we get into fall when we see the bigger calf runs, because more of our calves are born in the spring versus the fall. So you got to keep that into account as well. So fall, winter, spring, what are your options? You got to think about those types of things with that. So if anybody has any questions, I didn't get to go all the way through my slides, but I got a majority of it covered. Is there any other questions out there, Tyler?
There are a few.
Okay.
One of them was, can you repeat the grasses that can be seeded?
Okay, so Bermuda grass can be seeded. A good portion of our range or native grasses can be seeded as well. It's our hybrid Bermuda grasses that cannot. So your Tifton 85, Jigs, Coastal, those hybrid type Bermuda grasses are typically propagated through cuttings or digging sprigs. Your winter annuals, ryegrass, oats, wheat, and rye, or other seeded varieties. And I didn't even mention clover, legumes. They can be a great part of the system because they're going to harvest nitrogen out of the atmosphere for you. Your cattle consume those legumes. They manure on the pastures, and they provide that nitrogen source back into the soil. So, and legumes can be seeded as well. So your clovers.
And then one of the questions was, they still have a lot of dead grass from the last freeze. Should they leave it in place to serve as feed, or should they cut it?
Well, great question. So one misnomer is that whenever the frost hits, that forage has no nutritive value. In reality, that forage is kind of frozen, literally. Okay, and we've sampled forages before frost and then we sampled it after a frost, and we sampled it subsequently 2 months later. And we do not see a drop in protein level, and we don't see a drop, significant drop in the energy level of that forage. Now, if you do see a lot of rainfall, like we saw on the eastern side of the state, and you've got a lot of that forage out there, the rain will cause that forage to leach out the energy and essentially make it rot too. So you have to be careful with that. So you'll lose some palatability with it. But if you go in and supplement those cattle with some protein and energy, yes, you can make them. Sometimes you heard the whole old timers call hustle that grass. But the longer they graze it, the more stem's going to be left. They're going to have eaten most of the good out of it. So it's kind of, you have to be careful. When I tell people on grazing those frosted out forages, is if the manure is piling up, and that's one of the things that I was hoping to get covered, was looking at manure, some observational things. Let me get to the end of that. Well, and I can provide these slides to you, Tyler, too, or we can come back for another session. But some observational things to look at is manure piles. So the top of that slide up there has got some manure from a high quality forage. The bottom down here, that's low quality forage. So there's more fiber that's undigested. So looking at that, but then also looking at the body condition of your cows. If you're supplementing them, they're on that native forage or that frozen frosted forage, but they're going downhill, you probably better do something different. Meaning when I'm saying going downhill, they're getting thin. They're losing their body fat reserves. So good question.
Well, we're going to take one more question. And then if you have more questions, you're always welcome to email us at education@tscra.org. And what we can do is we can connect you with the recording of this, and we can get the slides and get them sent to you as well. So our last question for you is, how does liquid feed winter supplementation fit in with regard to cost/benefit?
Yeah, great question. So when we talk about supplemental feed, and they'll probably talk about it on the next session, I'm assuming, when they're talking about winter feeding, essentially supplementation is providing nutrients that are deficient in the forages that you're feeding, whether it be standing forage, what they're grazing, or hay. Okay. And so you're trying to meet that nutritional gap that's available there. Now, supplementation types, anything from corn or distiller's grain, soybean meal. When I was growing up, we fed a lot of cottonseed cake. Whole cottonseed is a byproduct. Cubes, many of you on here probably feed cubes. Tubs or liquid feed. Liquid feed, so if you look at those, liquid feed may not be as cheap. So the more processing a product has, the higher the cost per pound of nutrient. So for example, a byproduct, whole cottonseed or distiller's grains, something that's not processed very much, will maybe be your cheapest cost per pound of nutrient. Whereas a tub, hard molasses tub, is going to be on the highest end because there's more processing. On the flip side, the more convenient is the tub, the less convenient is the byproduct because you got to have handling properties. Liquid feed kind of fits right there in the middle. It's self-fed, so you don't have a lot of labor that's associated with it. And it does have the nutrients that you need as well. Now, a lot of times you will see that they will tell you to keep that liquid feed out year round and the cows will eat what they need. There is some truth to that with that, because what you're trying to do is make sure that those cows get enough body condition. If I wait till my cows look like this and start feeding in the wintertime with liquid feed and hay, it may be hard for them to catch up before they go into calving because they physically are not going to be able to consume enough of that product. But when liquid feed fed according to the label, whatever manufacturer that you have, it is a great option. Now, I will tell you, just like all the other commodities, liquid feed has gone up substantially over the last year. The other thing with liquid feed too is, again, as I mentioned, if your forage quality, I worked with a producer that had some 4% protein hay that was low in energy, and he was putting out liquid feed. We had to add other feed resources with it because the liquid itself would not meet those deficiencies. So again, it's a good option. And price is in there, but there's a convenience factor that goes along with it as well, compared to some of these others.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We're going to try to be considerate of your time as well and for joining us. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, please reach out. We're happy to connect you or answer them. And we'll get the recording of this sent to you all within 48 hours. Dr. Clear, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Tyler.